Welcome to another edition of Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Ron Painter. Doug Oreste is at the controls. And, you know, I say this a lot, but I really am energized by the conversation today, and I want to welcome my guest, Oreste DAversa.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Doug.
Pretty close?
Yeah, that's close. So Rusty DAversa, but that'll work.
All right. Rusty, I really appreciate it. Rusty is a certified professional coach, which I think is really pretty cool and something that all of us can use, as well as being the author of several other books, a public speaker, a seminar leader, entrepreneur coach, marketing and sales consultant. Rusty has done a lot of work with major corporations that we would all know, IBM among them. And interesting, you're also an all-faith minister, doing a lot of work with people around what's life's purpose. And man, that is a big topic, which hopefully you will come back and we'll talk more about. But today I want to talk about a lot of focus on this notion of quiet quitting and like what it means and what to do about it. And so I want to ask you how you're defining it and what you're seeing among your clients with regard to this issue.
Well, let's define it first. The idea of quiet quitting is the person does not physically quit their job, but mentally they pretty much, I won't say shut down, but what they're doing is just the basics to keep their job. Whatever their job description is, the person's not doing a stitch more to keep their job. So mentally, in their mind, they quit the position. Physically, they're still there getting a paycheck.
So, a lot of conversations, I was in one yesterday where the question was raised about during the pandemic, we all experienced a lot. What are some of the things that might stay the same or might remain? Is this idea of this malaise, is this something that was accelerated during the pandemic, or is this a new phenomenon that we've seen through the pandemic? Because I think lots of us are experiencing that kind of angst about, whatever normal is today.
I think it's a combination of a few things. I think the pandemic was a catalyst to what's been cooking underneath regarding what I call mental hygiene. It's really, we don't discuss it. It's my opinion, I would say this past 25 years, we've moved to a workforce that we're using our minds more than our bodies. And really the workplace has not addressed how do we relax our minds or how do we use our minds more efficiently. I like to use the word mental hygiene. We all know what physical hygiene is. Obviously, we need to keep our bodies clean and bathed and healthy, but no one discusses mental hygiene, and we're using our minds more and more, and we're stressing our minds, and we're not equipped to really deal with that. One of the things I do is I teach people how to meditate, to use their mind more properly and more effectively, and keep the mind functioning properly. So I think what's been happening, and the COVID, the pandemic, really made it a catalyst. Is we're seeing the stress is becoming so tremendous mentally that it's affecting people and their production and their ideas, because in tandem with the pandemic we saw the Great Resignation, that people just said, all right, I've had enough and I'm walking out. Okay, realistically, I don't know how that worked for those folks, because realistically everyone has to work. They need to earn money. But I don't know. I don't know if there's been a study about the Great Resignation and the impact on people. But realistically, I understand the concept. You get to the point where you can't take it anymore, and you've got to do something. Something's got to give. In physical labor, it's pretty straightforward. You know, my background a little bit also really quickly. My father was a bricklayer, so I came from a blue-collar world, so it was pretty simple. You worked hard all day, you threw yourself on the couch, and you had a good night's sleep. And the next day, for the most part, you were recharged, re-energized, and you're ready to get back to work. Mentally, where we're using our minds more and more, unless the person has some type of practice with their mind that they're able to really shut the mind down and unengage, what happens is the mind keeps on going and going and going and going and going, and sooner or later you're going to have the classic comment of dis-ease. Something's going to give. All right. So what's happening too, also with these smartphones that have almost become a second appendage to most of us, is we're never giving our mind a chance to shut down. So I think that the pandemic, to answer your question, has exacerbated a lot some things that were cooking, and now they've come to a head, and we're seeing the symptoms through quiet quitting and some other things that I'm sure will come up in our conversation today.
So, Rusty, is this, like, you do work, again, with a number of large corporations that we would recognize. Is this something that's, I don't want to say unique to the U.S. workforce, but is this something unique to us, or is this something that your clients are saying to you, I've got this problem with my European workforce and my Asian, or is it really more about us here?
Well, I think it's a little bit of everything. You know, lately, England, for instance, is talking about moving towards a 4-day work week, and preliminary studies have shown that those folks are working 4 days, and they're producing even more than when they were working for 5 days. So we're seeing that work balance is very important. Number two, I think in our country, the second you say anything relative to mental, it goes into a black box of this is bad, this is foreboding, we shouldn't, you know, the person, there's mental illness, there's something wrong with the individual. And the truth of the matter is, as I mentioned before, if you've noticed, we're using our minds more and more. We're not doing the physical labor of a past century ago. We're just not doing that work. We're working with our minds, and our society, for the most part, we don't address it. You know, we're all good about bodies and exercise, physical exercise, and keeping the body healthy, and vitamins and minerals and stretching exercises. But the mind, which we're using more and more, kind of all of a sudden is really not talked about. And the irony is we're using our minds more and more. So why isn't stress-related practices like meditation, guided imagery, creative visualizations, why aren't these part and parcel of the everyday regime of working in our society?
Yeah. Two quick points. One is we're preparing. This is going to be released before our annual forum. We are actually bringing somebody in to talk about yoga at the desk, like what you can do during the day. But so there is or at least we're trying to recognize it. But I want to get back. So I'm going to bring you in, and you're going to be talking to my workforce. Do you see that sort of physical reaction from people when you start talking about how we got to pay attention to our mental health? I mean, is there that sort of like, oh, wait a minute.
Well, exactly. You know, mental health. Think about it. Mental health. Just the words themselves. You know, everyone understands cancer. Oh, the person who got cancer.
That's crazy, because I was just thought the same thing. Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We understand cancer. We
right.
just say that, or I've got to go in for a heart
bypass.
Right. Or whatever. We understand that.
Right. But mentally, all of a sudden, things go sideways. You know, a little bit of spirituality in our conversation. Obviously, you mentioned that I am an interfaith minister. We're made up of 4 components: the physical, which is pretty straightforward, which is the body; the mental, which is the mind; the emotional, which is the emotional heart; and the spirit, which is our life force. If any one of those is out of dis-ease, is out of balance, we're going to have problems. With the body, it's pretty straightforward, right? You have cancer. Okay, now your body doesn't work properly. If you don't take care of it sooner or later, it's going to get worse. But mentally, we just don't address it. Somehow, mentally, when we talk about the mind and relaxing the mind and using the mind efficiently and effectively, all of a sudden that conversation goes sideways. But then again, we hear about people they can't sleep at night, so they're on sleep pills, and they're on anti-anxiety medication, and they're on this and they're on that. Well, all those really, the cause is just stress. Modern day society has become more and more stressful, and we're not really taught how to deal with that stress, besides alcohol and pills and things of that nature. And I think in the workplace has got to somehow assimilate that. Now, we're not talking about, burning incense and taking 4 hours off of the day to meditate, and kumbaya and om. We're talking about taking a 5-minute break to just reset your mind. I've created a very simple meditation technique that I'd like to share with your folks if we can, but if they're driving, obviously they shouldn't do it. I've created a very simple meditation technique that helps calm the mind, and they can do it in relatively 2 or 3 minutes. So if you'd like me to share with that, I will. If not, well, I'll send you folks the link, and you folks can pass it on to your constituents.
No, let's talk about that, but let me step out a second and remind folks, you're listening to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards. I'm your host, Ron Painter, and my guest today is Rusty DAversa, who is a certified professional coach, and we're talking about the quitting, the phenomenon of quiet quitting, but how that really is coming back to this growing recognition about mental health. So, okay, Rusty, I'm ready. I'm in the middle of my day. Maybe I'm starting to get cognizant of my list this morning was too long, my list of to-dos. I now got 8 emails that have just come in that everybody seems to want at the same time. How do I step back and calm the mind and I guess kind of recalibrate?
Right. Well, the technique I'm going to share with you, can be done at your desk. You can go to the restroom and do this. And we're talking about doing this for literally 5 minutes or so. We're not talking about eating up hours and hours. It's a very simple technique that you can use to center your mind and quiet your mind. And it's called the 1, 2, 3, 4 technique. And all you're doing basically it's closing your eyes, quieting your mind, and repeating the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 over and over again. And no matter what comes into your mind, you're focusing on that big number counting, focusing on the counting of the numbers. Because what you're doing is you're giving your mind a task to do. So it's focusing on counting on those numbers. What will happen eventually as you do this, and you're breathing, you're taking some deep breaths and all this, what's going to happen eventually, your mind's going to gradually just quiet itself, and you'll be able to center yourself. Now, doing that 2 or 3 times a day, again, at your desk, or if you don't want to be seen doing it, going to the restroom, will help you deal with your stress. Because what we don't want is peaks and valleys of emotions, I'm so stressed I can't deal with it anymore, or just the opposite. It's too much and I'm not going to do nothing. So you want to keep it in the middle. You don't want your highs to be super high, and you don't want your lows to be super low. So with any practice, you want to start doing this. You're 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening for the rest of your life. And within 21 days, within 30 days, you're going to be able to deal with anything that comes across in your professional or personal life. But as with physical hygiene, you have to do this. This is a practice that you need to do every day. In fact, you're not going to do it once, and your whole life would be changed. It's like eating properly. It was up to me. If I ate broccoli last week, I should be good for like a month. It doesn't work that way. You've got to look at the mental hygiene like the physical hygiene. Okay, we have to eat every day, so we have to feed our minds every day. All right, and I think. Go ahead.
Melanie Anderson, who works here, Melanie is always on the rest of us about putting green into our day. And I must admit I don't always do that, but yes, it is something that we got to do every day. Rusty, I'm kind of curious. Again, coming back to your background, you work with a lot of large large companies. And I want to ask about, what do you say to the employer around recognizing mental health in their employees? I mean, outside of the, I guess, sort of, I mean, there are economics involved with this, right?
Well, that's really the bottom line. That's really, because if your workforce is not performing effectively and efficiently, you're really losing money by the day. And yeah, it's sometimes you really can't quantify it in hard dollars, so to speak. But if you see a loss of productivity, at the end of the month, you're going to see it in your numbers. You know, so what I've learned when we speak about this is really we try to package it in a manner that it's another year's benefit to offer employees that's going to just be good for them. You know, so in speaking to larger corporations, I usually discuss things like stress management for professionals, things of that nature, and I tend to package it that way. So it's like the old adage, you know, when your dog doesn't want to take your medicine, you put the pill in the keys, and then the dog takes the medicine. Now they're feeling better, and everybody's happy. So it's unfortunately, the reality is also, as you mentioned, the marketing and sales background, perception is reality. If this is perceived as something mentally off, then it's not going to be accepted properly. If it's seen as something to be of help and to make you more productive, your life better professionally and personally, I think people are able to digest that.
So as an employer, how do you start this conversation? Because do you get pushback? Do you get worries about, well, wait a minute, this is too personal. I don't want to be getting into people's business. But how do you begin this conversation with your employees?
Well, it's a little technical in the sense of, the people have various belief systems that people may feel that it may intrude. But I think if it's done in a group setting, that everyone does it together, and they see the benefits of it together, and they see it in action, actions speak louder than words. I think if you put it in motion, and now with the advantage of technology, people can do things at their desk. As I mentioned earlier before, this meditation I mentioned, it's a YouTube, so people can do it at home without anyone knowing. It could be just disseminated as an email. Oh, by the way, if you find that you're stressed, here's a suggestion that you may want to try. Or again, it may want to be done in a group setting where, okay, we're going to take a little break today at 1 o'clock. Let's all meet in the conference room. We're going to do a little stress management. We all do it together, and then they have the tools. But it really boils down to corporate culture. It boils down to employee culture and things of that nature. But again, once you try it and you see it, what I tell people to do, and this is a test, get a piece of paper, and this is not going to be collected or seen by your manager, supervisor, owner, nobody. Get a piece of paper, and on a piece of paper, make it into 2 columns. How do I feel now, and how do I feel after? So, and then how do I feel now, put exactly how you feel, good, bad, or indifferent. And then do the exercise, and then how do I feel now, and then write how you feel later. And then you can't argue with that type of proof. You'll see the difference. You'll feel the difference.
I'm writing that down. Rusty, is it harder today for these conversations between the employer and the employee? I mean, the rhetorical dissonance in the U.S. is pretty high. Is it harder to approach these issues today for the employer and the employee? I mean, is it harder for us even to talk about our differences?
I think we're seeing, I'm not going to call it a revolution in the workplace, I am going to call it an evolution. Like we saw an evolution in the 1800s where people were working 6 days a week, 18 hours a day, and now we're down to pretty much a 40-hour work week and with overtime and things of that nature. I think we're at that point now where the workforce in this country, specifically, I can only really talk about our country, being obviously I'm a U.S. citizen, I think we're seeing an evolution. That evolution is different categories and different generations of people. We have We have baby boomers still in the workforce. We have Gen X, Gen Z, Gen MOUSE. You know, we have different generations and different work ethics, different ideas of what work is, and I think we have to find a middle ground to try to assimilate both the old and the new. The challenge is as follows. One of the challenges, I should say, is, again, work ethic. You know, what work ethic means to a baby boomer might be different to what it means to a younger person. But at the end of the day, work is work. That's why they call it work. If not, they would call it play. You go to work, not to play. So, and I think that's the challenge there. We have a different generation of what work really means and what the concept of work. I do believe that there can be a middle ground between the generations. I do believe that what we need more of is communication face-to-face and not communicating just behind a screen. I do believe the pandemic, unfortunately, has forced us to communicate behind screens, and now it's time to come away from the screen and have interpersonal skills again. I also believe that interpersonal skills are the oil, the grease, whatever you want to call it, that makes organizations run and makes organizations run productive and effective. And I think we need to get back to the basics of communicating face-to-face.
Do you think that, I guess this is more a question about hope or positive thoughts. I mean, we're watching this demographic shift in the U.S. The number of emerging workers does not equal the number of boomers that are walking out of the labor market. Do you think this is I mean, it's always a great time for employers to really think about, past the rhetoric of, hey, our greatest asset are the people who work here, and actually think about the people who work here. Are you seeing more of that? Are you more optimistic that we're open to the recognition from the employer that, hey, got to engage more with your employees?
Well, I think there's certain financial realities. I think the financial reality is there's not enough people going and working. And what's going to happen is companies are gradually going to start losing revenues. These are black and white conversations. These are very revenue-based conversations, be it in the public sector or private sector. You know, you need people to make these organizations run. And that's why I think we're going to have to see an evolution of meeting all generations in the middle somehow. Let's face it, people need, want, and desire work. They have to work to survive. I mean, we don't live in a society where I can do my work, and in return for my work, you're going to give me a chicken and three eggs. You know, we work in a society where we need money. And that's the hard fact. We work in a society where companies are in business to make profits. You know, we live in a society that people want to have a balance of a good professional life and a good personal life to enjoy the fruits of their labor. So I think, as it was again in the 1800s, employers were more than happy that we went to a 5-day work week, working 9 to 5, 40 hours. But there has to be some type of middle ground, because what's going to happen is I think we're going to start seeing industries disappear. I think we're going to see companies disappear. If they don't find some type of middle ground, meaning maybe flexible work hours, maybe child care. I mean, it really depends on your work. It depends on a lot of things. So, have these conversations with a broad brush. But for instance, like England, once again, they're going to a full 4-day work week. So possibly, if we go to a 4-day work week, maybe you may have some of the folks working Monday through Thursday, and the other folks work from Thursday to Friday to Sunday. Now all of a sudden the company's producing even more, making even more money. So I think there has to be some really out-of-the-box thinking that really needs to come to the table. I don't think it's impossible. I think, as the book says, these are the best of times and these are the worst of times. But I do believe we're going through an evolution that we need people to really meet face-to-face when at all possible, start saying, look, I want this from you, and you want this from me, and how can we make this happen? The good thing, again, regarding the best of times, I mean, we're doing business, we're talking to people around the world within seconds, which was, once science fiction has become science fact. So it really depends on the type of industry. You know, some things you cannot phone in. Some things you have to be there. And we have to look at a workforce that, you know, in my mind, your workforce is broken down into three areas: unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled labor. All right. So the challenge is, how do we get these positions filled at all levels? Because at this point, there's more jobs than there are people. So if employers need to get creative with hiring practices, retaining practices, I think that's where we're at right now. I think we have to get back to basics and readdress everything from the ground up. Because perception is reality, and the perception is there's just a shortage of people, and there's jobs to be filled, and I have to believe companies, revenue-wise, it's going to start affecting their bottom line if it hasn't done so already.
Rusty, fascinating conversation. I know that you're the author of a book called The 7 Simple Principles of Prosperity. Where can I find out more about you and about your work?
Well, the recent book I really released, that book was several years ago. I released a new book called Life Beyond the Pandemic, and which is available at your local bookstore and also on Amazon, and it addresses what we're all going through. They can learn more about me personally at lifebeyondthepandemic.com and also on my business website, metrosmallbusinesscoaching.com.
Awesome. Rusty DAversa, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate the conversation, and I am hoping that we can connect again to talk more about what you're seeing and what you're experiencing with your work with companies here in the U.S. and across the world.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me today as your guest on your show.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And thanks to all of you for listening. You've been listening to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards. It's been my pleasure to be your host. I'm Ron Painter. If there's a question you have for Rusty that we can get to him, or if there's a topic that you would like to hear more about, contact us at the email address nawb@nawb.org. Again, that's nawb.org. For all of us at the National Association of Workforce Boards, thanks for joining me, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hey, that was a really good conversation.
Cool. And then, Rusty, what we'll do is we'll make sure there's a link when we put this up on the site. We'll make sure there's a link back to Life Beyond the Pandemic.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, we'll talk soon.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You as well.
Mr. Painter, before you leave, I have...
Dr. Doug.